Ulf Bjornsson was meant to follow in his father's footsteps, until betrayal cast him into the sea, and his brother Rorik seized power. Left for dead, Ulf rises not as a fallen heir, but as a wolf without a pack. With a band of outcasts at his side, he sets his sights on vengeance, but a seer's warning haunts him, and whispers of a darker hand behind Rorik's rule cast doubt on his path. To reclaim his birthright, Ulf must face not only his brother, but the truth of the man he is becoming. The storm is coming, and the gods are watching. Welcome to Hugin and Munin Stories. This is our story, The Wolf and the Raven, a Viking's Betrayal. Chapter 1. The Raven Falls. The wind howled over the North Sea, carrying with it the salt of distant shores and the echoes of fate yet unwritten. Beneath a sky of slate and storm, the great longships of Jarl Björn the Raven cut through the water, their prows shaped like snarling beasts, their sails filled with the breath of the gods. The time for war had come. Ulf Bjornsson stood at the prow of the largest vessel, clad in iron and wolfskin, his hand resting upon the hilt of his sword, Vagskin, the wolf's hide. His father's voice carried over the deck, rough as the bark of an ancient tree. This night, we carve our names into the bones of England. They will know the wrath of the North. A roar of approval rose from the warriors, their faces painted with ash and blood, their axes sharpened for slaughter. But amidst the war cries and the thrum of oars, Ulf's gaze flickered toward the ship beside them, where his younger brother, Rorik, stood with his own men. Rorik had always been different. Where Ulf bore the strength of their father, his younger brother possessed something else, an edge honed not in battle, but in whispered deals and hidden ambition. He was clever, sharp-eyed, and unshakable, but there was something else in him too, a hunger. Their eyes met across the waves. Rorik smiled, but the expression did not reach his eyes. Ulf turned away. Tonight, they would fight side by side. They were brothers. The fortress loomed ahead, a hulking thing of stone and timber, its towers clawing at the storm-lit sky. The Saxons had fortified their walls, but they had not reckoned with the fury of the Northmen. As the first torches were cast, as the battering ram was heaved forward, as the cries of battle rose into the heavens, Ulf felt it, a weight in his chest, like the touch of an unseen hand. Then the betrayal came. It began with a scream, one of their own, cut down from behind. Ulf turned in time to see the shadow of treachery unfold before him. Rorik's warriors had turned against them. Steel met steel in a clash of horror as Northmen slew Northmen, the battle shifting from conquest to slaughter. Through the smoke, Ulf saw his father, Björn the Raven, a storm in human form, carving a path through his traitorous son's warriors. His blade shone like the light of a dying star, and for a moment, Ulf believed the old man would endure, that even treachery could not fell him. But fate is cruel. Rorik himself delivered the killing blow, a spear thrust through their father's back, piercing deep. Björn staggered, his mighty frame collapsing to one knee. Blood poured from his lips, and as he fell, his gaze found Ulf's. No words were spoken, but in that instant, Ulf understood. He had failed to see what lay before him, had failed to protect the man who had shaped his world. A scream tore from his throat as he fought toward his father, cutting down Rorik's men with the fury of a wolf who has lost its pack. But there were too many. Then the sea swallowed him. The blow came unseen, the force of it sending him sprawling over the broken ramparts. Cold, iron-touched waves surged up to meet him. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Rorik standing above, sword in hand, watching as his brother was claimed by the abyss. But Rorik did not turn away immediately. For a moment, he lingered at the edge, his face half lit by firelight, the other half swallowed by shadow. He watched as Ulf was lost beneath the waves, and then, as if speaking to the gods themselves, he whispered, "It had to be done." Then he turned and walked away. Yet the gods were not done with Ulf Bjornsson, for the sea does not always take, it sometimes returns what was lost. Chapter 2, The Wolf Rises. The sea was a cruel mother and a merciless judge, but it had not yet claimed Ulf Bjornsson. Cold. That was the first thing he knew. A chill that bit deeper than the sharpest steel, sinking into his bones. The weight of water pressed against him, dragging him down into the abyss where lost souls whispered. The Northmen called it Aegir's embrace, the deep where warriors who had not died with a weapon in hand were lost forever. But Ulf did not surrender. With a final desperate surge, he clawed his way toward the surface, lungs burning, muscles screaming. When at last he broke through, he gasped for air, the salt stinging his throat. The night was heavy with the remnants of the storm, and above him, the moon hung pale and distant, as though watching his struggle in silent judgment. He drifted for hours, the tide carrying him wherever the gods willed. His strength faded, and his thoughts blurred between waking and dream. At times, he saw his father standing on the prow of a ship, bound for the afterlife, his eyes filled with the weight of an unspoken command. Other times, he saw Rorik's face, wreathed in shadow, his voice a whisper in the wind. "You were never meant to rule." Then the tide changed. He awoke to the sound of gulls and the soft lapping of water against the shore. The sand beneath him was damp, his body sprawled where the waves had carried him. A distant fire crackled, sending a thin ribbon of smoke into the dawn sky. Pain racked his limbs, but he forced himself upright, blinking against the haze of exhaustion. A figure loomed nearby, a woman, her stance wary, an axe gripped in her calloused hands. She was tall and broad-shouldered, her golden hair woven into thick braids, her eyes sharp as a falcon's. The axe she carried was no common tool. It was a warrior's weapon, its edge keen, its haft worn from years of battle. "You are not dead," she observed, her voice steady, but laced with suspicion. Ulf's throat was raw as he rasped, "Not yet." The woman did not lower her weapon. "Your name?" For a moment he hesitated. He had no men, no home, no title. His name was a ghost upon the wind, but the fire inside him, the fury that had kept him alive, had not dimmed. "Ulf Bjornsson," he said at last, "son of Björn the Raven." Something in her expression changed, recognition perhaps. Then she nodded, as if weighing the truth of his words. "I am Astrid." She gestured toward the fire. "You look half drowned and near death, but I will not kill a man before he has had a chance to eat." Ulf staggered forward, his body protesting every movement, and dropped beside the fire. A thick stew simmered in a small iron pot, its scent rich with herbs and roasted meat. He ate in silence, the warmth returning to his limbs. Only when he set the bowl aside did Astrid speak again. "I have heard of you, Ulf Bjornsson, and I have heard of what your brother did." Ulf's hands clenched into fists. "Then you know why I cannot rest." Astrid studied him for a long moment before she nodded. "Good, because you are not the only one with a score to settle." She rose and whistled sharply. From the shadows of the trees, more figures emerged, grim-faced men and women, each bearing the look of those who had been cast aside, hardened by misfortune and sharpened by vengeance. A scarred warrior with one eye, his gaze cold as winter. A young man who moved like a shadow, silent and watchful. A few others, each marked by the weight of loss. "This is what remains of those who would not kneel to Rorik," Astrid said. "Exiles, oath-breakers, warriors with nothing left to lose." She fixed Ulf with a measuring look. "You wish to reclaim what was stolen? Then prove yourself." A low chuckle came from the one-eyed warrior. "Or die trying." Ulf looked around the circle of firelight. He had lost everything, his home, his father, his people. But in this moment, beneath the vast sky and the watchful gaze of the gods, something stirred within him. The wolf had been cast out, but wolves were not meant to be caged. "I will not die," Ulf said, his voice steady. "I will take back what is mine, and if any man or god stands in my way, I will send them to hell." A murmur of approval rippled through the gathered warriors. Astrid's lips curled into the faintest of smiles. "Then let us begin." The hunt for vengeance had begun. Chapter 3: The Oath of the Wolf. The days that followed were filled with blood and hardship. Ulf had not only to prove himself, but to forge a new brotherhood, one not bound by birthright, but by steel and shared purpose. Astrid was the first to test him. At dawn, beneath the boughs of a gnarled old oak, she came at him with her axe. No words, no warning, only the sharp whistle of iron as it cut the air. Ulf barely rolled aside in time, sand spraying beneath his boots. He reached for his sword, but Astrid kicked it from his grasp before he could draw it. A cruel grin flashed across her face. "You say you would take back your birthright, yet you fight like a man still drowning." Ulf growled, lunging at her with his fists. He caught her arm, twisting hard, forcing her back a step, but Astrid countered, driving her knee into his ribs. He staggered, but did not fall. The others watched in silence. Sigurd One Eye sat on a rock, arms crossed over his broad chest, a smirk playing at the edge of his scarred lips. Leif the Silent leaned against a tree, his expression unreadable. The rest of the outcasts stood in a loose circle, waiting to see if the son of Björn the Raven was worth following. Astrid came at him again. This time, Ulf was ready. As her axe swung toward him, he stepped inside its arc, driving his forearm against hers. The force knocked the weapon aside just long enough for him to seize her by the waist and throw her down into the dirt. A heartbeat of silence. Then Astrid laughed. "Good," she said, brushing the dust from her leathers as she stood. "Not dead yet." Ulf bent to pick up his sword, his breathing heavy. He could feel the eyes of the others on him, weighing his worth. He was not his father. He was not the Jarl they had once followed. But he would be something else, something more. Sigurd spoke first. "You have strength, Northman, but that will not be enough." Ulf met his gaze. "Then what will be enough?" The old mercenary stood, resting his hand on the pommel of his sword. "We do not have an army, but we do not need one. If you wish to take back what is yours, you must think as the wolf does, not as the bear." He nodded toward the distant hills. "The Saxons say there is an old witch who dwells in the highlands, a seer. Some call her Volva Skuld. If you wish to know your path, you will find her there." Ulf frowned. He had seen enough of seers and omens to know that their words were riddles, dangerous and twisting as a serpent's coil. But something inside him whispered that this was a road he must walk. And so they set out. The journey into the highlands was a trial of its own. The land was harsh and unyielding, the wind biting against their skin as they climbed the rocky slopes. Storm clouds churned overhead, heavy with unfallen rain, as if the very gods watched their passage. The hut of the seer stood alone upon the highest ridge, a crooked thing of timber and thatch, its door carved with runes so old even Ulf could not read them. As they approached, the door creaked open. "Come!" a voice rasped from the darkness. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of burning herbs. A single fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows against the walls. The seer sat cross-legged upon the floor, her face hidden beneath a deep hood, her fingers tracing strange patterns into the dust. "You seek vengeance," she said without looking at him. Ulf stiffened. He had not spoken, and yet she knew. "I seek justice," he said. The seer chuckled, a dry sound like autumn leaves beneath a boot. "Justice? No, you seek blood for blood. You seek to tear down your brother and take what was stolen. But tell me, Ulf Bjornsson, do you truly believe your hands will remain clean?" Ulf frowned. "My brother is a traitor, and you would become a killer." His jaw clenched. "He deserves it." "Perhaps," the seer murmured. "But when brother kills brother, the gods take notice. The threads of fate are not so easily unraveled without cost." She reached into a small clay bowl and pulled forth a handful of bones, scattering them onto the floor. The firelight flickered, casting strange shapes upon the walls. The seer studied the bones for a long moment, then slowly lifted her gaze. "There is more at play than you know," she said. "Rorik does not rule alone. A darker hand moves behind his throne." Ulf felt a chill creep along his spine. "What do you mean?" The seer's voice was like the whisper of the wind through a graveyard. "You will see soon enough." He did not like the way she spoke, as though his fate was already decided. "Then tell me my path." She reached out suddenly, grasping his wrist with a hand as gnarled as old tree roots. He did not pull away, though her grip was iron. "You stand upon the edge of a knife, wolf of the north," she whispered. "Take your revenge, and you may yet reclaim your birthright. But spill your brother's blood, and the curse will be yours to bear." Ulf's breath caught in his throat. The seer released him and sat back, her voice returning to its quiet rasp. "The choice is yours." He stood slowly, his fists clenched. His father was dead. His people were scattered. His home was stolen. He had no choice. He turned to leave, but the seer called after him one last time. "The gods are watching, Ulf Bjornsson, and they do not forget." As they descended the mountain, Astrid was the first to speak. "She rattled your bones." Ulf exhaled slowly. "She gave me nothing but riddles." Sigurd chuckled. "Seers always do, but the message was clear enough." Ulf glanced at him. Was it? Sigurd's one good eye gleamed in the dimming light. "She warned you of what every man must face when he seeks revenge, what kind of beast he will become." Ulf said nothing. As they made their way back toward the firelit camp, where the outcasts waited, he turned the seer's words over in his mind. A darker hand behind Rorik's throne, a curse for brothers' blood. Fate was closing in, and soon the wolf would have to decide. Chapter 4: The Wolf and the Raven. The wind carried the scent of war. Ulf Bjornsson stood atop a rocky outcrop, looking down upon the land that had once been his. The long house of his father, his birthright, now bore Rorik's banner, a black raven on a crimson field. Torches lined the walls, their flames flickering in the night, illuminating the fortress that had once been filled with laughter and feasting, but now stood as a monument to treachery. He had returned. Behind him, his band of outcasts, Astrid the Axe, Sigurd One-Eye, Leif the Silent, and the others, prepared for battle. They were not an army, but they were wolves, lean and hungry, willing to tear through flesh and bone to reclaim what had been lost. Ulf tightened his grip on his sword, Vagskin. The steel felt heavier tonight. The seer's words echoed in his mind. Spill your brother's blood, and the curse will be yours to bear. But there was no turning back. Astrid stood beside him, her axe resting against her shoulder. Are you ready? Ulf exhaled slowly. I have been ready since the day he betrayed us. A slow grin spread across her face. Then let's spill some blood. The wolves descended upon the raven's nest. The attack began in silence. Leif slipped through the shadows, cutting the throats of the sentries before they could cry out. The gates opened without warning, and then the night erupted in chaos. Ulf and his warriors surged forward like a winter storm. Steel met steel, axes bit into flesh. The air filled with the screams of dying men and the crash of shield against shield. Rorik's warriors were taken by surprise, but they were still Northmen, and they fought like cornered beasts. Ulf carved his way through them, his blade drinking deep. He fought with the fury of a man who had lost everything, who had been left for dead and had crawled back from the abyss. Through the madness, he saw him. Rorik stood at the steps of the longhouse, watching the battle unfold with a sword in his hand, his black cloak billowing in the firelight. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, dark and sharp as a raven's, met Ulf's across the battlefield. Then he turned and walked inside. A growl built in Ulf's throat as he cut his way forward, slaying those who dared stand in his path. He reached the longhouse, stepping over the bodies of Rorik's warriors, and pushed open the great doors. Inside, the fire roared in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the hall. The banners of their father still hung from the rafters, now tainted by the presence of the traitor who sat upon the high seat. Rorik rose as Ulf entered, his sword resting at his side. You should have stayed dead, brother. Ulf took a slow step forward, his blade steady. You should have made sure of it. A smirk touched Rorik's lips. Perhaps, but the gods love their games, don't they? He gestured to the seat behind him. Here we are, at the end of it all, and you think this is justice? This is not justice, Ulf said, his voice low and steady. This is the price you pay for your betrayal. Rorik's smirk faded. He stepped down from the high seat, sword raised. Then let's end it. They clashed like thunder and lightning. Ulf fought with all the fury in his soul, his strikes swift and relentless. But Rorik was no mere coward. He was fast, precise, every movement honed from years of battle. They were brothers, forged in the same fire, raised by the same warlord. Steel rang against steel, sparks flying in the dim light. Ulf drove forward, forcing Rorik back toward the hearth, his rage fueling every strike. But Rorik was cunning. He sidestepped at the last moment, slashing across Ulf's side, drawing blood. Ulf staggered, but did not fall. Pain was nothing, not after what had been stolen from him. With a roar, he lunged. His sword cut through the air, and this time, Rorik was too slow. The blade sank into his brother's chest. Rorik gasped, his fingers trembling. as he grasped the hilt of the sword buried in his flesh. His knees buckled, and he collapsed against the great wooden pillar that held up the hall. Ulf stepped back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The seer's words rang in his ears. "Spill your brother's blood, and the curse will be yours to bear." Rorik's lips twisted into something that might have been a smirk, or perhaps just pain. "You've won," he rasped, blood bubbling from his mouth. "But you are no different from me." Ulf's grip tightened on his sword. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, slowly, he turned away. He left Rorik where he lay, his breath shallow, his life slipping away. He had come for vengeance, but standing over his dying brother, he realized something. This was not victory. This was not honor. The longhouse doors swung open, and Astrid stood there, blood on her axe. The battle outside was won. Ulf met her gaze. "It's over." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. They stepped outside into the cold night. The longhouse burned behind them, the flames rising into the sky like the wings of a great raven. The wolf had taken back his home, but he would never be the same. Epilogue: The Price of Vengeance. The morning after the battle, Ulf stood at the edge of the sea, watching the tide roll in. The salt air stung his wounds, but the pain was a distant thing now. Rorik was dead. The raven had fallen. But the seer's warning lingered in his mind. The gods had taken notice, and the price of vengeance was never truly paid. Astrid approached, standing beside him. "What now?" Ulf exhaled. "Now we rebuild." She nodded. "And after that?" He was silent for a long moment, watching the waves crash against the shore. "After that," he said, "we see what fate has in store." Far above, a single raven circled in the sky, watching, waiting. And so the tale of Ulf Bjornsson did not end. It had only just begun. And with that, we say goodbye for this time. Thank you for listening to our story, The Wolf and the Raven, A Viking's Betrayal.